Hey guys, welcome to another video here on the AviationPro channel. In this video I'm going to show you how to start up the Bombardier Dash-8 Q400 from cold and dark. In this video I'm going to be using the amazing Majestic Dash-8 Q400 and I'm going to show you both the cold and dark startup procedure and the FMC programming. And this is quite a complex aircraft, however if we just take this step by step we'll get it through. I'm just going to show you my way of doing this. I'm not following any particular official workflow. I'm just going to try and explain as I go, as we go through the different systems. And by doing this you should be able to get quite a good grasp of what this aircraft kind of looks like and how to operate its systems. So without further ado, let's head into the cockpit and start up the Dash-8 Q400. So welcome into the Dash-8 Q400 cockpit. As you can see, it's fully cold and dark right here, and I'll just show you quickly how to get this aircraft in a cold and dark state. It's pretty easy. So to get this aircraft in a cold and dark state, you have to open up the control panel that comes with the product, and just simply before you load the aircraft or before you start the sim, make sure that the cold and dark cockpit state is selected for startup. So when you load the aircraft, it will take a few seconds to load into cold and dark state, and then you're good to go. And this is the state that I'm going to be using and working from in this video. So again, the systems on board this aircraft are quite complex. It's not, you know, like your usual Boeing or usual Airbus. So there are some things to take into account, especially when flying. But the startup is relatively doable, so we'll just take it step by step again, just going it through the panels in a structured manner as possible. Now first of all, of course, like always, you want to turn on some electrical power, and for that we need to select the battery switch on, and then from right to left we turn on the other batteries, and the DC power is enough to run the main systems on board the airplane. So we'll just start here at the top left, battery master is on, and then turn on the other batteries. As you can hear in the background already, some systems are starting to run. The displays are coming alive. Displays will take a few seconds to load, and in the background the aircraft is going to align its inertial reference system, as you would call it on a Boeing, for example. So in order for it to determine its position in space. So just give it a few seconds. It will take a little while for the displays to pop up while they are starting up in the background.
Bank angle.
It's a bank angle warning that you will get, and you see the engine instruments are now online, and the primary flight display, the navigation display, that's all online as well. So we'll just cancel these warnings for now. In the background it's still aligning, so while it's doing that we'll just go ahead with the rest of the startup. Now what you want to do is of course get some electrical power. Now if you load the cold and dark state, you can already see the ground power unit attached, but I'll just show you how to do it in the first place. So what you will have to do is turn on the flight management systems. These are quite weird in comparison to, for example, Boeing FMC, so it really is a little getting used to, but we'll just take it step by step. So just turn it on, and as you can see it's going to check itself in the background. It's going to check the different systems, and in a few minutes it will read that the different systems have passed the test in the background. And as you can see, one is now online, and the other flight management system is online as well right now. So what you want to do is simply accept this information right here, and accept on this side as well. Go to data and click services, and as you can see you can request here the ground power. Now in this case it's already attached to the airplane, so what we'll have to do is go back to the overhead panel, and then we can turn on the external power right here. So we'll just turn this on right here. Make sure that the bus tie switches to tie as well. The other generators are on as well. We'll just leave it as like this. But now the external power is supplying the DC part of the system, and the DC part again is just you know, the main systems. Right here on the right you also have an AC control panel for AC power or alternating current, but you don't really need it. I believe this system, for example, powers some of the anti-ice stuff and the window heating. But in practice, you know, once the engine starts, that will all kick in as well, so you don't really need to have AC power on. So just have the external power on the DC panel on, and you can check on the multifunction display here on the first officer side the electrical system. So as you can see, now the DC external power is on. So just to verify that you're not draining the battery, just make sure that this comes on right here, so you're absolutely sure that the you know, the external power is now providing power to the airplane. In order to open up this page, you go back to the pedestal right here, and here you can view the different systems, for example fuel, and also the electrical system that we just opened. Alright, okay, so now that the electrical system, the DC part of the electrical power is now established, we can turn on some exterior lights first of all. Make sure that you turn on the position lights so that the ground crew knows that the aircraft is being powered, and if it's night you can also turn on the local lights, of course. So I'll just give you a quick run through the overhead panel, the different systems. Right here we have the ice protection. We don't really have to touch any of that right now. Here we have the windshield heating, and we can turn it on, for example, once the engines have started and the windows are fogging up, we can turn it on right here. Here we have the fire panel. You can do a quick test of the different fire systems if you want to. Like that. Just make sure that everything is working, of course, and then you can do that as part of your cockpit preparation. Flight data recorder, you can test that as well, but you don't really need to touch that in this case. The PFD altimeter units, you know, they are at feet. If you want to show, you know, the altitude, for example, in meters as well, we can flick this switch. Right here we have some pressure gauges. Yeah, we don't really need that right now either. Right here we have some light switches that you can use in case you know, it's necessary when it's dark and you want to light up the cockpit. You need this panel. And we have the APU control. We're going to start that up in a minute. Of course, we're still on external power, but by the time we have filled in the flight plan, we'll switch on the APU. The engine start panel. The cam altitude right here, AC control panel we don't really have to touch, just make sure that the generators are on for now, and the air conditioning, we'll visit that later on as well. And here we have some other switches. For example, you want to make sure that you turn on the fasten seat belts, and no smoking, doesn't hurt to turn it on already. Here are some more light switches, and the emergency lights, you want to arm them, of course. Okay, so this is just a quick run through of the overhead panel. Again, we'll discuss the systems a little bit further as we go through the startup process, but as you can see, you don't really have to touch that much at this stage. Alright, then we'll go through the main panel. There's some more systems that you can test here, for example the GPWS system if you want to, so just to make sure that's all working. For now though, we'll just go back to the pedestal and start up the radios first of all. There's a COM1 radio right here that you can turn on. There we go. As you can see, it's now turned on, and here we have the other radios as well. So just make sure that you turn them on. As you can see, it takes a little while to test again, but now it's turned on. Now that we've established basic electrical power aboard the airplane, we can take a look already at the flight management system. And again, it's quite different if you're used to, for example, Boeing aircraft or things like that. So we'll just take it step by step. So again, we're now still in the services menu. If you want to, you can, you know, access pushback features right here, or the gear pins, for example, or remove the ground power, or you know, open and close exits. So for example, let's close the forward entry right now. As you can see, it's closed. There are different pages right here on the system. Well, these are the main ones that we're actually going to be using. And again, it's quite a weird system if you're used to Boeing. So let's take a look. So the first thing that you want to do before you enter any information is make sure that you load the aircraft with fuel and payload. So you need to do that through the control panel again. Just make sure that you go to weight and balance. Now, depending on which flight plan you use, you can, you know, enter all the different data right here. So what you'll be loading, for example, is the cargo and the amount of passengers. Okay, so let's take a look at our load sheet. So as you can see, we are flying with about 1000 kilograms of cargo, 1056, and the different compartments are right here. So you can just try out and just kind of divide the weight if you want to. So let's, for example, do 400 in the forward compartment and then 659 in the back compartment. And we'll have to take a look at how this is distributed, because we're going to take a look at this graph in a minute. And we have 50 passengers, and you can divide them across the different sections. So let's for now just put 15 and 15 in these sections, and then we have 10 left in the aft section. So just put that right here. Okay, then we have the fuel. So as you can see, the minimum takeoff fuel, by the time we take off, we should have 2,190 kilograms of fuel on board. And again, just make sure that the units line up as well, so that you're not putting in pounds when you're actually working in kilograms in the aircraft. As you can see, we are actually flying with kilograms. And the trip fuel is just the amount of fuel that you need to you know, that you're going to burn for the actual flight itself. So as you can see, the trip fuel today is 1,135 kilograms for our route to Frankfurt. Now, what you want to do is now click the calculate button, and as you can see, the graph has now displayed some information. If there's anything red in this area, you know that there's something wrong, and if you don't see these boxes within this so-called flight envelope, then there's something wrong as well. That's because, you know, it's a pretty, you know, weird aircraft in terms of balance. It's really possible that, you know, the aircraft, you know, the balance is incorrect. So you really want to make sure that you're entering the right data. So for example, if I would now enter 50 kilograms more in the forward compartment, as you can see, it's get pretty close. Okay, let's add another 50. As you can see right now, one of these values is outside the flight envelope, and that's what you want to avoid. So as you can see, the takeoff mass index is out of the flight envelope. So just make sure that it's somewhere in the center. That's probably the ideal situation. So let's put, for example, 400 right here right now, just like it was before. Okay, it looks like we need a little bit more cargo in the aft section instead of the forward section. So let's just play around with the values a little bit. 3 and 7. Well, as you can see, it now gets a little bit closer. You could even adjust it a little bit more if you want to. The aft section is larger, so it fits more cargo. As you can see, it's right now actually bang in the middle, so that's actually perfect. So as long as these, you know, boxes are within the flight envelope, preferably a little bit in the center, and below their associating maximum values, you're good to go. So there are no red flags right here. And what you want to make sure is also, you know, kind of take a look at the zero fuel mass in this configuration page, and compare that to what's in your flight plan, because your flight planner might, you know, have a little bit of a different, you know, way of looking at the aircraft, you know, the different weights of the aircraft and the fuel burn and all that stuff. So the weights might be a little bit off. In this case, the weights line up pretty much, you know, perfectly. You can see about 23 tons of zero fuel weight. So as you can see, that lines up correctly with the zero fuel mass that we have here. Okay, so once that's all good to go, you can send the data to flight sim. It's going to load the payload and the fuel into the airplane. The flight simulator is going to pause for a second, and you probably see the aircraft jump a little bit once it's loading. So we'll just send data to flight sim. As you can see, and here the sim is now pausing, so we unpause, and right now we should have the correct fuel and payload on board. And for the fuel, you can of course use the fuel system just to make sure that you have the correct value of fuel that you want according to the flight plan. Now as you can see, we have 2,195 kilograms of fuel on board, but the flight plan actually requires our release fuel to be 2,470. So apparently there's a discrepancy right here. So I'm just going to go back to this value right here. So make sure that you know, depending on your flight plan format, your takeoff fuel is going to be interchangeable with the, you know, the release fuel in a particular flight plan format, for example. So I'm just going to enter, instead of the takeoff fuel, the release fuel, which includes a little bit of extra fuel. So just calculate it again. Everything's still within limits. So I'll send the data to flight sim again, unpause, and now I have the actual fuel amount that I want. So just check and cross-check with the flight plan that the release fuel is actually in the tanks. Alright, so now we can continue with the flight management system. We're flying from Innsbruck to Frankfurt. So you just click the flight plan button again, and you start with the first point right here, point number 1. As you can see, there's no real way to enter, for example, a particular scratch pad value. You just enter and type right here what you want. Okay, so what we're going to do is enter here our origin airport first of all. So that's Innsbruck, Lima Oscar Whiskey India, so the ICAO code, and then you just hit enter. All right, and as you enter it, you can see that you get some information about this particular airport, and you just click accept. Alright, now the way you continue right now is a bit strange, you know. Again, there's no scratch pad, it's really getting used to. What you have to do right now is simply enter the next waypoint first. So the first waypoint on our flight plan is the Kogel waypoint. So we'll just enter that right here, Kogel. Intersection, again some information, we'll just accept that value. We'll be entering an SID later on. So then you want to enter the next waypoint. In this case, the next waypoint is a direct, so we're just going to enter the next waypoint right like this up here, Q0. Alright, hit enter, again some information so you can verify you have the right waypoint. That's correct. As you can see right now in the flight plan, we have a next waypoint via an airway. Now, of course, you could enter all the different waypoints manually along the, what you have in the flight plan, but actually there's an easier way. So after you've entered the first waypoint where the airway begins, make sure you select the next line, so line number 4, and then click on list. And then you can click on airway right here. And as you can see now, airways from Q0 show up. So as you can see, our airway that's flying from Q0 is Lima 608 to Kovan. So what we're just going to do is we want to have Lima 608. So what you have to do is now select the number 1. You can see it fills that in and then hit enter. Okay. So as you can see, it right now says, okay, we want to fly from Q0 via Lima 608 to any waypoint along that airway. Well, the waypoint we want to fly to in this case is Kovan. So as you can see, that's number 2 on the list. So we are just going to enter number 2. As you can see, Kovan, right? So it's a very weird way of entering waypoints, as you can see. So as you can see, Q0, Tetro, Kovan, there we go. So that's correct. Now, same for the next airway. Again, just click on list, airway from Kovan. We want to follow airway Tango 163. So that's number 2 on the list, and hit enter. And we want to fly that airway until waypoint Xinla, which is number 4 on the list. There we go. As you can see, so that has now been entered. Kovan, Gizek, Etasa, and Xinla. Now again, after Xinla, we just have the direct waypoint. So basically, we can just enter the waypoint right in here, which is Xopmo. Hit enter and accept, and then direct Adnis, and then to the Papa Sierra Alpha or Spessart VOR, and hit enter. Okay. And if you want to, you can also put in the arrival airport, in this case, Frankfurt. Alright, so now that all the waypoints are in here, what you can do is click the format button below the flight management system. As you can see, that shows you an overview of the different waypoints. So you just select a particular waypoint and then we'll just go there. So let's just start with Google, for example. As you can see, it shows up. Then Q0, Tetro, Kovan. Just click next page and then you can have a visual representation of the route. So just make sure that there's nothing weird in there. Okay, so what we want to do right now is of course enter a standard instrument departure, because we're not going to directly fly to Kogel, especially not when flying out of Innsbruck. So in order to do that, we go to the menu page, and right here we can select departure and arrivals. So right here we're going to select depart. And here we can enter the different information. Well, today we're going to be using runway 08. Again, you just don't type 08 and enter it here. No, you have to make a selection. So number 1 is runway 08. So we hit enter. It gives us the different SIDs. So as you can see on the flight plan, we're going to be flying the Kogel 3 Juliet departure, which basically means we're going to fly to the Rattenberg NDB and then make a left turn to fly towards our first waypoint. So we just select number 3 again in the list. Again, it's a little bit you're getting used to if you're used to other types of FMCs, but it works okay. And basically, if there are any sort of transitions right here, you would also see a list appear. In this case, that is not the case, so we're just going to fly this, departure to Kogel and then direct Q0. Okay. So we can now go back to the flight plan. Again, right now we can check all the different waypoints in here. Just make sure that they are all in there. So if you click next page, you can see all the departure routes. Rattenberg, you see there's a holding right here officially. Well, we're probably not going to be flying that in practice, but as you can see, the entire SID is in here until Kogel, and then it resumes with the rest of the flight plan as we entered it beforehand. Now, same for the arrival. We can click on the menu button if you want to already plan an arrival at this stage. It's something you can do. So same procedure. Select the runway that you're going to expect. Expect runway 25 left, number 6 on the list. What star are we going to be flying? Well, let's take a look. We're going to be flying the Spessart 25 Sierra transition, basically. So that's number 13 on the list. There we go. And we're going to be flying the transition to runway 25 left. So that's number 2. and here you can also indicate what type of approach you're going to be flying. So we'll just pick the ILS Zulu for runway 25 left, number 1. As you can see, it's actually a pretty convenient way. It's, you know, it's just the method of presentation of the information is different. The method of entering all the information is different, but it works. So as you can see, we have now all the waypoints, and yeah, if you look at the charts, indeed, we're going to be flying via the Delta Foxtrot 616 waypoint if we're going to fly that transition. So as you can see, I'm just going to select number 2 right here. So basically the aircraft, you know, recognizes automatically how this star is structured, which is pretty nice, and we'll just enter that in the flight plan for you. So if we click the flight plan button on the right, as you can see, we now have our complete flight plan in here, including the entire arrival into Frankfurt. Now, there might be some discontinuities in here, so you have to make sure that you check the charts right here in order to make sure that's entirely correct. Now, as you can see, if you select complex approaches like the ones at Frankfurt, it may happen that, you know, information is entered double. So as you can see, we here arrive at waypoint Letki, for example, and then we fly the ILS, but that waypoint up here is, you know, there already. So basically you want to make sure that you check the charts, make sure, you know, you go through the waypoint step by step, and if something is double, you can either just reselect the arrival without, for example, selecting the final transition, or in this case I'm going to delete the different stuff right here. So just select the waypoint and click delete like that. Okay, so and until Letki we're just going to be flying from Letki the ILS to runway 25 left. So if there are any no links in the flight plan, make sure that you kind of check out what they are, and if you can get rid of them, it would be nice. The only one that you don't want to get rid of is the one that appears after the missed approach. Okay, so for example, we're just going to land on runway 25 left, but if we are going to go around and we press the TOGA button on the you know, the sides of the throttle right here, the flight management system will automatically remove this no link and activate the missed approach procedure as entered during the arrival setup. So make sure that you do not delete the no link, at least not delete the no link between the runway and the missed approach procedure. Okay, so just leave that in there. So as you can see, our route is now programmed. Now what's different, especially for me when I first tried this aircraft from a Boeing perspective, is, you know, there's no need to enter any specific altitudes or speeds. You know, there may be some restrictions at different waypoints, just like they would appear on the standard instrument departure chart. But other than that, there are no real restrictions or, you know, calculated flight paths. But it's basically because, you know, this aircraft just climbs, you know, using specific speeds, and during the descent you can use the VNAV function in order to calculate, you know, at what waypoint do I want to be at what altitude, and then I can use the target vertical speed in order to make sure that the aircraft gets down in time. So the VNAV is only really used during the arrival. But just that you know, are aware that, you know, on the flight plan page you will not actually see the different you know, altitudes at which you're going to be expecting to fly different waypoints. Right? So don't worry about that. Now what we want to do right now is, now that the flight plan has been filled, the entire route is in there, we want to enter some weight and fuel information as we loaded it into the aircraft. So basically, you have here the basic weight, so what the aircraft weighs, you know, itself. Then you can enter the amount of passengers. Again, just make sure right here. Well, I'm really used to Boeing. I'm typing 50 again, but what you want to do is select PAX and then type 50 and hit enter. So you see the passenger weight, and, you know, you can enter the cargo weight. So I'll just enter the cargo weight as planned, which was 1056 kilograms of cargo. Hit enter. As you can see, the zero fuel weight is a little bit off. Again, you know, some flight planners include baggage weight within the passenger weight. Other flight planners don't. So if we delete the cargo, for example, we probably have some more accurate zero fuel weight. Well, actually that becomes a little bit closer. So you might have to play around with the values a little bit here, you know, in order to get the correct weight. All right, so I'm just going to enter 200 right now. All right, so that gets a little bit closer to the actual weight, you know, in zero fuel weight that I have on the flight plan. So as long as you make sure that the actual zero fuel weight is correct, then this page should be good to go. But just keep in mind that there, you know, the passenger weight in your flight planner might be different than what the flight management system thinks the passenger weight is. So you might have to enter a little less cargo. Now the fuel, again, 2475 is currently loaded, so we just enter that here. and it gives us a total gross weight at this stage of about 25 tons, which again corresponds to the takeoff weight on the flight plan. Now, for reference, you can enter the different fuels that you need for the reserves. So for example, your alternate fuel, in this case alternate is Stuttgart, so that's according to the flight plan 573 kilograms. Hold fuel, well, I took some hold fuel with me for about 15 minutes, which corresponds to about 210 kilograms, and that actually is already the extra fuel. So we have basically 0 extra fuel, so we can kind of get an idea of the reserves that are on board. So by the time that you reach the reserve fuel, you might want to think about heading for your alternate if you're not going to be able to land at your destination airport. And that's the basic setup of the flight management system actually done, at least on this side. As you can see, it's relatively doable, but it's just a little getting used to. And that's basically all the information that you have to enter. Right here, you know, especially when you're flying, you will see some more performance information, things like that. What you can still do is go to the flight plan, and once in the flight plan menu, you can hit menu and then next page, and you can see here flight plan winds. So basically this allows you to enter winds at different waypoints. Now, it's a bit bothersome sometimes to enter wind at every single waypoint. So what you can also do is just enter the wind at some main waypoints that you're going to be flying over. So for example, I can enter the wind at the Rattenberg right here. So oops, that's this one. So that would be 204 at 024 knots. 204 at 024. As you can see, the system automatically tries to estimate the wind at the other waypoints. Okay, so then well, let's do another waypoint right here, Kovan for example. The winds at this waypoint, as you can see on the flight plan, is 190 at 047, 47. As you can see, again, it just updates the wind in between there. It just kind of guesstimates how the wind's going to change going through the different waypoints. Just make sure that you're aware of this, especially for longer routes. It may be useful to enter the wind information so you have a better idea of your performance during your flight, and how much your fuel burn is going to be, and what time you're going to arrive, and especially the VNAV calculation upon arrival will also be more accurate. One more thing to do right now is on the first officer flight management system, you want to cross-fill. Now, a mistake that you can make is that you fill in the flight plan here and then think, okay, I'm going to cross-fill this one to this one. But that's actually not the way it works. Cross-fill means that one flight management pulls information from the other. So if you cross-fill right here, or if you cross-fill from this flight management system right here, it's going to pull the data from this flight management system, but this one is empty. So make sure that you keep that in mind. So this one is empty, so you want to pull information from this one to this one. So we're going to cross-fill flight plan right here. As you can see, cross-fill receive, so it's now going to receive information, and also the fuel information is what we're going to be cross-filling. Okay, again, a little bit of a weird system. They're not linked by default. So if we now go back to the flight plan here, as you can see, the flight plan is now also included on the first officer side. All right, so yeah, that's kind of a weird way of how this flight management system works. All right, so now that the flight plan has been filled, one thing that you might want to do is in order to get the first waypoint active, is make sure that you use the direct to function. So we will now be directing towards the first waypoint on our flight plan, which is just the airport itself, and hit enter. Okay. Sometimes this is necessary to actually get the route active, but just make sure that you see this magenta direct or first waypoint on your instrument departure, just to make sure that the nav function on the board the airplane is actually going to work. So just by habit you might need to do this in order to make sure that the route is actually active. Okay, so now that the flight plan has been filled, you may want to kind of set up the mode control panel in order to display the right information. So basically here on the compass rose you want to display your lateral information regarding your flight path. So it now reads the information from the VOR that's tuned in the navigation radio, but you want to let this system use the flight management system as a source. So what you do here is click the nav source, switch it around, and as you can see, it now reads data from FMS1. So it kind of it shows you constant, as you would like to describe it, a localizer display on an ILS. It kind of constantly shows you how much you deviate from the lag that you're trying to fly. Okay, so just make sure that you set the nav source to FMS, because that's what we're going to be using, of course. And then of course what you can also do is select the first altitude that you're flying. So in order to check that, we have to check on the charts. As you can see, if we're going to fly to Rottenberg, we're going to be flying to 9,500 feet first of all. So there we go. HSI select, make sure that's to the pilot side flying. So in this case this pilot is flying on the left side, so make sure it's selected to that one. So as you can see, it's now to the left. What you can do is select nav, because we're going to want to fly the LNAV route as soon as we depart. And then also make sure you select altitude select, because otherwise it will not level off at this altitude if you're on the autopilot. So always make sure on this airplane that you actually select altitude select next to selecting a particular altitude in the window. Okay. So of course now you can of course just adjust this panel to your liking, maybe tune some ILS frequencies in the background as well. For example, here you can also set a squawk code if you want to. And if you want to put the TCAS on, you hold the button right here next to the transponder for 2 seconds, and it will turn on the TCAS. So as you can see right now, the TCAS should be on as soon as you depart. And also make sure that you set the QNH at your departure airport. So current QNH is 1003. Okay, so just cross check with the chart whether that altitude is actually correct. So as you can see, system wise we've come pretty far. Now all we need to do is get ready for pushback, and we'll run through the checklists. I'll just call up the pushback truck real quick. I'm just going to use GSX in this case. We're going to be pushing back to the left, because we're going to be taxiing in that direction to runway 08. Alright, so now that the pushback truck is connecting, I want to start the APU. Let's just assume that passengers are boarding. So for that, we'll just go to the overhead panel again. The way you start the APU is actually pretty easy. You first turn on the power switch and then click start. And this is going to start the APU in the background. As you can see, some lights will blink and go on. But now the APU is going to start itself up in the background. So soon the generator will be available, and we will also have bleed air available in order to get some air conditioning running through the cabin. Alright, as you can see, the power is now on. In this case, as you can see, the APU is not providing electrical power because we still have the external power connected and providing that service. Okay, so if you click the generator switch, it's not going to work. As you can see, it will not actually connect the ground through the electrical system. So you have to turn off the external power right here in order to get it started. Okay, so external power is off, and as you can see, the APU has now taken over. The generator is on. And just to verify that, you can again go to the electrical system right here, electrical page. As you can see, the APU generator is now providing load to the electrical system, so that's good to go. So what I'll do right now is just remove the ground power unit, and we can just cancel the request. And right now the ground power unit should be removed momentarily. If you want some air conditioning on board the airplane, you can have to turn on the bleed air of the APU. And as you can hear in the background, it is indeed supplying bleed air. Now in order for the APU to actually properly provide bleed air, you have to make sure that the bleed air switches of the engines are actually turned off. If they're turned on, as you can hear, the bleed air stops. Okay, so you have to make sure that the bleeds of the engines are off if you want to let the APU actually provide some bleed air. Okay, so that's all set for now. Basically what we'll do right now is go through the first checklist, the flight deck safety checks. It's quite long, but because it's long, it's quite useful because it will be easier to go through the different systems, make sure that we have everything correctly. Okay, so documentation, well, let's just say it's on board. The batteries are all on and checked. The main bus tie is set to tie, that's correct. DC external power APU, well, we have the APU running right now, so that's correct. The bus voltages, well, you can check on the electrical system again, just make sure that all the voltages are within their you know, normal range. Now the next item, safety equipment on all that stuff. Well, of course we cannot really simulate that in this case, so we'll just assume that it's in there. The landing gear lights and pins are checked, and 3, the engine intake doors are green. Just make sure that these switches are green. If you're going to start the engines and there's a lot of snow and icing outside, you may want to open the engine intake doors in order to let the engine get some more air during the startup. Well, in this case at Innsbruck there are no icing conditions outside, so we'll not be bothering with that, so we'll just leave them closed, but they're green, so that's checked. All the circuit breakers, well, you have to check the circuit breakers right here on the captain's side and on the other side as well. Here on the first officer side, make sure that they're all in. In the meantime, as you can see, the windows are really fogging up, so what I'm going to do is heat up the windshield, so you can do that here in this section. And also the pilot side window heat can turn on. And if you even want to demist further, there's some switches right here on the captain's side and on the first officer side as well, in order to kind of demist the windows. Just make sure that you open up those switches, otherwise the you know, the windows are going to be totally fogged up because we have the air conditioning on already on board the airplane. Alright, then we have the alternate gear door inhibit switch. Well, that's this little switch over here. It's kind of hard to find. It's all the way on top. Just make sure that this guard is closed and then you're good to go. Fire and smoke detection, well, we have already kind of tested that. The bleed air 1 and 2 are indeed off, which were these switches on the right. The APU bleeds as required, well, we have them on already. Pressurization is this panel right here. Just make sure that you've checked the landing altitude is, you know, the same as the departure airport. Make sure you set the landing altitude you know, upon landing at Frankfurt in this case. Otherwise, just leave these switches as they are. Now the airplane will just regulate the pressure automatically. Looks like I missed one item. It's the recirculation fan, which is this switch over here. Just make sure that the recirculation fans are on. As the name says, it's just circulating the air. The air conditioning packs are checked. Just make sure that the packs are on auto. We can just leave these switches throughout the flight generally. The emergency exit lights are armed, and the fuel transfer quantity, we have to go back down here. Fuel transfer is the button. Just make sure it's in the middle, so we're not transferring any particular fuel. And as you can see, the quantity is kind of you know, balanced between the tanks and is corresponding to what we want in our flight plan. Parking brake is this lever right here. It's set, and you can check the brake pressure here on the multifunction display. You can see that brake pressure is actually applied, so that's checked. The power and condition levers are these levers right here. Make sure that they're all the way down to off. No steering is this switch over here. Make sure that it's off for pushback. Flight management system, well, we've all set that, it's all good to go. And the takeoff and departure briefing, let's just say that we've reviewed it, we know what we're doing, we know what we're going to do during the departure, so that's all set. So as you can see, the checklist really helps going through this step by step, making sure that we have set all the right systems before we go any further. And basically what we're now going to do is run through the before start checklist in order to start up the airplane. Okay, so the pushback truck is ready to go. As soon as I release the parking brake, it will start to pushback. So right now we'll just go through the before start checklist and work our way through. Alright, now first of all, we have trims. Just make sure they're set 3 times. So what you want to do is set the takeoff trim first of all. Make sure that's actually in the takeoff range right here. And you want to make sure that the rudder and aileron trim are in their center position. Okay, that's all taken care of. That's good to go. Then we want to check the doors and fueling lights. Well, the fueling is already disconnected and the doors are all closed, so that's all checked. The passenger signs are on the overhead panel. We already did that. The cabin report, well, let's just say it's received, and the flight deck door is closed and locked. So you can just check that in the rear. Of course, we're going to be starting our engine, so we want to have the anti-collision lights on red. And basically it's alerting the ground crew that we're soon going to be moving and starting our engines. And before engine start, we want to turn off the bleed air. Okay, so bleed air off, and now the bleed air is going to be used inside the engines in order to actually start the engines, right? And the batteries, well, they're all on, and it needs to be above 26 volts. So we're just going to check the electrical system again. and indeed the voltage for all batteries is correct. So those are good to go. And now we're basically ready for engine startup. So as you can see, really just make sure that you make use of the checklist in this airplane. It really helps you getting to know the different systems, going by the different systems, making sure that you do not forget anything. So the way we're going to start the engines in a minute, again the APU bleed is off, so the bleed air is now going to supply the engines for the engine starts, and we're going to use here the engine start panel in order to start the engine. So basically we'll select number 2 engine first and then hit the start switch in order to start the engine process, and the airplane will just basically monitor all the values automatically. As soon as we hit the switch on the overhead panel, we're going to put this start and feather switch to start and feather, and it's going to introduce fuel into the system slowly as the engine starts up and feathers the propellers. Alright, so make sure that you push the corresponding condition lever in the right position, okay, upon engine startup. Alright, so if we're ready to go, let's go. I'll release the parking brakes. There we go. Parking brakes released. And we can now start our first engine. So again, APU bleed is off, good to go. Number 2 first. So I'm selecting it to number 2 and then hit the start button. And then the condition lever we're going to put in the start and feather position. There we go. And just monitor all the engine instruments. You will soon hear the engine starting up in the background, which is a great sound, by the way. So make sure you enjoy it. Alright, just make sure that all the indications are in the green, the oil pressure and oil temperature is correct. And as you can see, the engines will kind of stabilize around 220 RPM in the start and feather position right here. And now we can start the next engine. So we'll move the switch to number 1 and we're going to start number 1. Same procedure. Make sure to take a look at the different RPM indications. Meantime, we'll set the parking brakes for the ground crew. And then we'll put the condition lever to start and feather, which is going to introduce fuel into the engines again and let the engine start up. Oil pressure is rising, oil temperature is rising, and this engine will stabilize as well. Okay, that's correct. Alright, so as you can see, we have 2 successful engine starts, and basically what we want to do now is put the condition levers to max, and this will stabilize the RPM of the propellers. So there we go. As you can see, the RPM will now rev up for taxi, and it will sort of stabilize. And now the engines are really roaring in the background, which is great. So as you can see, again at 660 RPM the engines will stabilize, and make sure that you take a look at the propeller ground range indication. As soon as the 1 and the 2 light up, it means that you're within the safe range of RPM. So when you're taxiing, you want to make sure that this stays within the taxiing range as well, alright? So that you taxi nice and slowly, don't rev up with full RPM, because that's really not necessary. Okay, so now we'll just go through the overhead panel. So we'll now just run through this column by column, make sure that everything is set, all the batteries are on as set. Basically the generators have to be on, of course, and we can turn off the bus tie. There we go, and make sure that the generators are on before you disconnect the APU. You just really want to make sure that the engines now supply the electrical power to the airplane. The icing system, we don't really have to touch that in this case. These boots that you can see on the outside of the airplane will inflate when you put this system in slow or fast, but that's only really used when you're actually into icing conditions, and these icing conditions will be reported on the airplane, so you don't really have to touch that. Again, the engine intake doors, you have to open that for engine startup when necessary. Same for the prop heat, only when you're actual in ice conditions. Now this is the rev speed switch, and this is related to the V speeds. I actually wanted to set the V speeds before pushback and engine startup, but we'll just take a quick look at that right now, and especially in relation to the rev speed switch right here. So the way it works in this aircraft is that the flight management system actually doesn't really calculate any particular V speeds. We have to do that using tables, so that's kind of the old-fashioned way. What you have to do, according to step 1, is look up the V-rotate V2 from the appropriate V-rotate V2 table below, and assume V1 is V-rotate. Now, flaps 10 is the standard takeoff setting, and our weight, as you saw from the flight plan, is about 25 tons. Now, just to be safe, I'll just pick the one from 26 tons, so we really are sure that we're following the right speeds. Basically, you can see, well, we have to take up the elevation at this airport, which is about 2,000 feet, and with our weight of 26 tons, it will mean that our V rotate and V1 is 116 knots and V2 is 118 knots. Okay, so as you can see, that's the way you select the V speeds. There's some more information though. If V rotate exceeds V2, assume V2 is V rotate. Well, that's not the case. If icing protection is on above 500 feet, add 20 knots to V2. So just make sure that when you're flying into icing conditions, that you add 20 knots to V2 speed. In this case, we're not going to be entering icing conditions here at Innsbruck, so we're not going to do that. Now there's some more information. Again, just take this step by step. Point number 4, for wet runway, reduce the V1 by 8 knots minus 0.1 knots for each knot of headwind, and or reduce it by 8 knots plus 0.3 knots for each knot of tailwind. Okay, so make sure that you take that into account, that you have the right V1 speed, because otherwise you won't be able to stop in time on the runway. Check V rotate not below 108 knots for flaps 5, 104 knots for flaps 10, 100 knots for flaps 15, well, that's correct, and check V1 not below 97 knots for flaps 5, 96 knots for flaps 10 in our case, and flaps 15. So that's all set. Okay, so we have our V1 and V rotate and V2. And then we can take a look also at the flap retraction speed and final takeoff speed. Okay, so again, assuming a weight of 26 tons, and we're flying with flaps 10, as you can see, our retraction speed will be 128 knots and the climb speed will be 148 knots. Now, going back to the aircraft, the way you want to enter that, just select the select switch here on the speed bug. Just zoom in a little bit, and then here you can enter all the different V speeds. So again, we'll have our V1 is 116 knots. There we go. Next one, rotate, is also 116 knots. Then our V2 for today is 118 knots. There we go. And then you can enter some other speeds right here. So we'll just put the flaps retraction speed, which is 128 knots. There we go. 128. And then our climb speed today will be 148. Okay, so these are just the references right here. So all the V speeds have now been set accordingly, so they will show up on the speed tape. Now, going back to the overhead panel, again, if you flick this switch to increase, it will mean that the aircraft will remind you to increase your speed, so your takeoff speed, so for example V2 plus 20 in icing conditions. So when icing conditions occur, the aircraft will warn you about that. So just as a reminder, okay? In this case, we can leave this switch to off because we don't expect any icing. Boot switch we can leave to normal, and the pitot static switches we want to turn on, of course, as always, just to make sure that the pitot tubes are not blocking up with ice or any other wet contamination that we don't want. Okay, the windshield, again, just adjust it to your liking. Make sure it's set to normal at least, and the side window to on, just to make sure that the windows don't fog up like before. These panels we don't have to touch anymore, basically. What we want to do now is turn off the APU, just verify again that the aircraft itself is now actually providing the electrical power, the generators are on, so we can remove the generator and turn the APU off by just unflicking sort of the power button on the APU control. Okay, now exterior lights, just leave it as they are. You can turn on the anti-collision lights to white once entering the runway. Then over to the next column, AC control. Of course, you want to make sure that the generators are on again. Make sure that you turn on the bleed, so we have some bleed air in the cabin and air conditioning is turned on. You can leave the bleed in minimum throughout the flight normally. The packs are left at auto, and the temperature control, well, of course, can again adjust it to your liking. Okay, so this is all set. The overhead panel is all being set. Then we move over to the main panel. The spoilers, you want to make sure that that is switched to flight, you know, before takeoff. Basically allows the spoilers to be active in turns as well, so make sure that you don't forget that switch. For now we'll just leave it on taxi. Well, we've already set the mode control panel right here, so that's good to go. You want to make sure that you turn on the anti-skid right here, so that's a little switch over on the first officer side. There we go. Otherwise taxiing will be a little bit difficult. Then next, before taxi, you want to turn on the nose wheel steering right here. That's this little switch, and it allows us to actually make use of this steering tiller right here in order to steer the nose in turns. Then we go to the pedestal. Again, it's quite complex. Just make sure that you put the GPWS landing flap to your current takeoff flap setting. Upon landing, you want to set this to your landing flap setting. We're going to turn on the standby hydraulics and the PTU control. And basically what this does is, in case of any of the other hydraulic system failing, we can basically you know, easily switch to alternate hydraulic, standby hydraulic power if necessary. Then next we have the engine control panel right here below. This is used to set an engine rating for takeoff. Normal takeoff power will be 90% torque. However, you can also reduce the takeoff power if you want to, if the runway is long enough. And in that way you can just, by clicking this switch, you can reduce the performance during takeoff. If you're doing a reduced takeoff and the runway is long enough, you can leave the bleeds on during the departure and, you know, use a reduced takeoff thrust setting. But if the runway is rather short and if the terrain is kind of challenging, for example, or if the runway is wet and you want all the performance available, you may want to consider leaving it at 90% and then turning off the bleed of the engines. Okay, so this just makes sure that all the power is actually going to the engine, so not any performance is lost by providing bleed air. Just make sure that if you're performing a bleeds off takeoff, that you turn the bleeds back on after departure, of course, because we want to pressurize the cabin properly. Okay, so don't forget these switches. In this case I'm going to leave them off for takeoff because again, this runway is relatively short, so we don't want to run into trouble. Then the next thing that you want to do is turn on the auto feather system. Basically what this is going to do is feather the propellers in case of a failure, engine failure. And basically it prevents you from having to do that yourself, and will allow to fly the airplane with less drag. Because if the propellers are not feathered, you know, they will, you know, create a lot more drag than necessary than you want to. So make sure that this system is on for takeoff. So that's pretty much it. If you want, you can turn on the weather radar right here at the bottom. And using this switch right here, you can switch between terrain and weather information. Well, of course, also do that like this. So on the first officer side, you can open up the navigation display right here and have the weather on that display while having the terrain display on right here. Okay. So just make sure that you're aware of that. Of course, you want to make sure that the TCAS is on, you know, during pushback, okay, and for the rest of the flight. So we've now pretty much run fully through the system of the airplane. As you can see, it's quite a lot, but I hope it kind of helps. Now, the way you can see if you hopefully did it right is by just checking the caution panel right here. If it's all black, if there are no more lights, then you're good to go. As you can see, the only light that's still on is the parking brake light, but that's normal because the parking brake is still set. Okay, we'll now just run through the checklist, which also includes you know, checking the flight controls. So let's just take a look. It will be the after start checklist. Well, the external power is off and the APU is off as well. The main bus tie switch, which was this one over here, is also off. The electrical panels right here are all checked. All the generators are on as necessary. The condition levers are max, as you can see, so that's all set. The outer feather is selected and white. The fuel pumps, these pumps over here are on. The hydraulics, well, we have to check the hydraulic pressure right here in a hydraulic system and hydraulic quantity, and that's all checked. The flaps and speeds, yeah, we want to cross-check that between you and the first officer, because the first officer can also view the different V speeds and make sure that you select the right flap setting for takeoff. So we're going to be flying with flaps 10. There we go. Flaps 10 are selected. Then you can check the rudder first of all. So we'll just push the rudder pedals, and then you can see on this display over here if we have movements. So full left and full right. There we go. The nose steering, which was this little switch over here, is on. The primary flight display, the multifunction display and the engine display are all set, also on this side, and checked. The bleeds, well, you know, at this stage, you know, you could just leave them on, but I've already turned them off. And just make sure that this switch is set to minimum, so minimum bleeds is applied to the airplane, which is the normal use. Now the next item, the de-ice pressure, you might wonder where it is. Well, that's on the first officer side. It's kind of hard to find. You can see the de-ice pressure gauge, and this is really the pressure needed to inflate the boots, you know, again on the outside of the airplane. Just make sure that the pressure is actually there. There's enough pressure for the anti-ice system to work, so that's been checked. The ice protection system, well, just make sure that's all tested and checked. And the transponder and the TCAS are on an altitude, and the TCAS is also on this side. Okay, so that completes the after start checklist, and basically what we want to do right now is also just check the taxi checklist. So the brakes, let's just say they've been checked. The takeoff warning, that's this little test up here, this little switch, and move that to test, and just make sure that you have the proper takeoff warning sound. The takeoff power is either at normal takeoff performance or reduced. Well, we selected normal takeoff power already. All the flight instruments have been checked. The next item is quite interesting. It's to test number 3 hydraulic system. So in order to properly test it, I'm just going to remove the control lock right here. The control lock is really there just to, you know, lock the flight controls and prevent you from using the, you know, the throttle too much. But basically we have to turn this on. So ignore this warning for now and make sure that with this system the flight controls actually work. So we can check the elevator first of all. Make sure we have full deflection. You can check that right here on the multifunction display if you've selected it. Full left, full right. Ailerons also full travel, and the rudder has already been checked. Okay, so we can now turn the number 3 hydraulic pump off again, and now the flight controls have been checked as well. The oil damper, we want to turn that on. The oil damper can be found on the actual mode control panel right here, and that just makes sure that the turns are coordinated and that the aircraft is able to, you know, kind of maintain balance in the air without rolling too much. Clearances have been reviewed by the pilot flying, but let's just make sure that everything is properly reviewed. Cabin is secured. And that's basically it for the taxi checklist. So as you can see, quite interesting, right? A lot of stuff to think about on board this airplane, but for me personally, I really regard this as a checklist airplane. This is really an airplane that, you know, by using the checklist you'll be alright. You know, in the Boeing, for example, it's very easy to just go through all the different systems and, you know, just do everything yourself and then run the checklist, make sure everything properly set. But I found with this aircraft it's usually easier just to go through the checklist and then, you know, flick the associating switches one by one. Of course, once you get more used to flying this airplane, you know, it will be easier to deal with all the different systems. You kind of remember things by yourself, but I simply personally don't fly this airplane enough to not follow the checklist and then just do the checklist later on. So make sure that you keep it in mind, but I hope that going through all these systems and reviewing all the systems one by one and kind of explain why they are there and, you know, why you have to do certain things, and you know, especially in relation to the flight management system, I kind of hope it makes sense. Again, it's an interesting aircraft. Just take it step by step, take it easy, make sure you take the time to go through those checklists. So all you have to do now is turn on the taxi lights, disconnect the parking brake, and then slowly start taxiing the airplane forward. Again, I say slowly because, you know, it's very easy to go out of the ground propeller range, so make sure that you keep it in mind. Take it easy again, and then you should be good to go. So I hope you enjoyed watching this cold and dark startup and FMC tutorial here on the AviationPro channel of the Majestic Dash-8 Q400. I hope you'll enjoy and have fun with this airplane. I definitely like taking it out on a flight every once in a while. So if you'd like to support the channel, if you appreciate the content, make sure to head over to my Patreon page, patreon.com/AviationPro. Your help would be definitely much appreciated. And for now, I wish you good luck with flying this complex airplane, and of course a lot of fun, and I will see you next time.